Check the time right now. Go ahead, look. You probably already knew it to within 10 minutes before you glanced down, because a number has been quietly running your whole day. When you ate, when you'll sleep, whether you're early or late for something that hasn't even happened yet. Now, erase it, not break the clock. Erase the idea of one. No hours, no minutes, no schedule waiting to be missed. For 99% of human history, that was the only way a person ever lived. And notice the small pull the clock just put on you. That faint sense that you might already be behind. Hold on to that feeling, because for the day you're about to live, it simply does not exist. Here's what almost everyone gets wrong. A day with no clock doesn't get slower or lazier or shapeless. It gets governed by something else entirely. The sun and the temperature of the air. So what did a full day in the life of an ancient human actually look like, hour by hour, when there were no hours at all? Let's start with what really ran their day, because it wasn't a schedule and it wasn't willpower. It was light and warmth. And before we romanticize any of it, let's be honest about the hard parts, because the grim version you're picturing isn't wrong. The work was genuinely heavy. Hunger was real, and sometimes it killed. A bad season had no safety net under it. If you're imagining a body that ached and a stomach that wasn't always full, you're imagining something true. But that's only half the picture, and it's the half most people stop at. The other half is stranger. Subsistence work was part-time. The evenings were long and full. And these were people who, by every measure we can take, slept deeper and moved more than you do. The truth of an ancient day sits somewhere between a brutal grind and a lazy paradise. And the only way to find it is to walk the day yourself. From the first cold breath before dawn to the last words spoken by firelight. You wake before the sun. Nothing made you do it. No alarm, no buzz. The air is at its coldest just before dawn, and your body simply finishes sleeping and lets you go. Around you, others are stirring the same way, at roughly the same time, and not one of them was told to. We actually know this with some precision, and it comes from a remarkable study. In 2015, the sleep researcher Jerome Siegel and his colleagues published work in the journal Current Biology, tracking 3 of the last pre-industrial societies on Earth, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tizi-Mani of Bolivia. 94 adults wore motion-sensing watches across more than 1,100 nights. One of the clearest findings was this. People woke before sunrise, in the coldest, darkest stretch of the morning, with no clock and no prompting. No slow climb out of grogginess, negotiated with a snooze button. No coffee bought on credit against a sleep debt. The day doesn't begin when a number says so. It begins when your body is done and the world starts to lighten. And then, almost at once, there's work in it. But this is where the picture bends away from what you'd expect, because the amount of work waiting for you is far smaller than you think. So the sun is up, and the camp divides. Here's the assumption to drop, that every waking hour went to clawing food out of the ground. The reality, drawn from decades of watching living foragers like the Hadza, looks more like a part-time job. Among the Hadza, the day's food-getting splits, loosely. Women go out in groups, often with children along, digging tubers and gathering berries and greens. The reliable calories, the food you can count on. Men go after meat, and after baobab, and after honey, which can make up something like 10 to 20% of the people's total calories. The honey often arrives through one of the oddest partnerships in nature. A wild bird called the honey guide that leads people to bee nests, waits while they break one open and takes the wax for itself. So how much time does all of this actually take? Be careful here, because there's a famous number and it's only half the story. In 1964, the anthropologist Richard Lee spent time with the Dobju hoansi of the Kalahari and measured it directly. To collect their food, adults needed only about 12 to 19 hours a week. That figure stunned people. It suggested foragers worked less than half a modern work week. But Lee himself, in a later and more honest accounting, added the rest of the real workload: making and fixing tools, processing food, the endless upkeep of a camp. And the total climbed towards something nearer 40 hours a week. So, not a vacation, but not a dawn-to-dusk death march either. Part-time survival with the afternoon still ahead of you. And the afternoon is where the hard half of the story lives. Because to picture the heat of midday, you have to picture the hunt. Here's the oddest weapon your ancestors ever carried: their own sweat. Most large animals can't cool themselves while running flat out. They have to stop and pant. A human, nearly hairless and pouring sweat, can keep moving in heat that forces prey to overheat and stumble. This is persistence hunting, and it's been documented among the San and the Hadza into recent decades, not as legend, but as something observers actually followed and timed. In one chase that the tracking scientist Louis Liebenberg recorded by GPS in the central Kalahari, a hunter ran a kudu, a large antelope, to exhaustion across more than 30 kilometers of midday heat in a pursuit lasting close to 5 hours. No ambush, no single killing blow. Just a slower, cooler, more patient animal, walking and jogging another one to the edge of collapse. Now, some of you have heard this framed as the thing that made us human, that we're built, body and soul, to run prey into the ground. Be careful there. Persistence hunting is real and documented. But whether it was central to human evolution is genuinely argued over by scientists, and there's no prehistoric footage to settle it. What's not in doubt is the body it implies. And that body is the next thing worth measuring because it makes a modern gym look like a rounding error. So just how hard was this body working? We can answer that with a number, and it's a startling one. The anthropologist David Rachlin and his colleagues strapped heart rate monitors to 46 Hadza adults and measured what their bodies actually did across an ordinary day. The result? About 135 minutes, more than 2 hours, of moderate to vigorous physical activity. Every single day. That's roughly 14 times the daily average of an adult in the United States. Sit with that. The thing you carve 45 guilty minutes out of your week for, the run, the class, the workout you have to schedule and force yourself toward, was simply the texture of their morning and afternoon. Not exercise, not a goal. Just walking, digging, carrying, climbing. The unremarkable cost of being alive that day. And their bodies showed it. Across the Hadza lifespan, Rachlin's team found essentially none of the markers of cardiovascular disease that fill modern clinics. The high blood pressure, the clogging arteries we treat as a normal part of aging. Their hearts didn't wear out the way ours do because their lives never let them sit still long enough to rust. Which brings us, at last, to the best hour of the day. And it's the one with the least light in it. The sun goes down and something happens that no other animal on Earth had ever done. The fire comes up and the day doesn't end. It changes. Here's the part that gets me. In 2014, the anthropologist Polly Wiessner published a study in the journal PNAS, where she did something almost no one had thought to do. She recorded what the hoansi actually talked about and sorted it by the time of day. 174 conversations, day and night. The difference was stark. In daylight, the talk was practical and sharp. Economics, logistics, complaints, gossip. The management of who did what and who owed whom. But at night, around the fire, all of that fell away. By her count, roughly 81% of the firelit conversations were stories. Tales of people far away, the dead, the funny and the strange, singing, and the kind of talk that knits a group into something that will die for one another. Firelight bought them a few extra hours the sun never gave, and they spent them not on more work, but on each other. And this is the same window of human life that left us its fingerprints, the painted lions of Chauvet Cave, about 36,000 years old. Carved shell beads from Blombos in South Africa, around 75,000 years old. A flute carved from the wing bone of a griffin vulture found at Hohlefels in Germany, about 40,000 years old. Among the oldest musical instruments we have ever found. Music, by firelight, before farming, before writing, before the wheel. The richest part of their day was the part the sun had already left. Now, I have to be honest with you about something, because everything I've just walked you through carries a quiet asterisk. We have no diary from 50,000 years ago. No one timed a Paleolithic morning. Every hour of this day is reconstructed from living foragers, the Hadza, the San, the Tsimane, used as our closest windows backward. But they aren't living fossils. They hunt and gather in marginal lands, and they touch the modern world. We know the shape of an ancient day from bones, from tools, from art. The exact hours are an honest reconstruction, not a recording. And there's one more thing in this day that no one fully predicted. It's the sleep. Go back to that study from 2015. Siegel and his colleagues, the watches, the 1100 nights. Everyone expected these people with no screens and no electric light to sleep long and deep, 9-10 hours, the way we imagine our natural rest. They didn't. Across all three societies, the average night was 6 hours and 25 minutes. Less sleep than the 8 hours you're told you're failing to get. They fell asleep about 3 hours after sunset. Not when it got dark, but later. They woke before dawn. They barely napped, which quietly demolishes the idea that older societies dozed the afternoon away. And here's the detail that reframes the whole day. Their sleep didn't track the darkness, it tracked the temperature. They drifted off as the night air cooled and woke as it bottomed out. Their bodies tuned to the thermostat of the planet itself. Chronic insomnia, the modern affliction that fills pharmacies, was so rare among them that their languages barely have a word for it. Less sleep than you. No napping. No lying awake. And then, about 10,000 years ago, we made a choice that broke this whole rhythm. We started to farm. And the bargain was worse than it looked. One study of early European farmers, published in PNAS in 2022 by Marciniak and colleagues, found them measurably shorter than the foragers before them. About 3.8 centimeters under their own genetic height potential. The longer day made the body smaller. So what did we actually trade? We traded a clock we carried inside us for one we hung on the wall. For nearly the entire human story, the day was governed by two honest things: the height of the sun and the temperature of the air. They told you when to rise, when to hunt, when to gather at the fire, and when your body would finally let you sleep. It was a clock no one had to wind and no one could be late for. Farming and everything after it slowly replaced that. We invented stored grain, then bells, then hours, then minutes, then the glowing number you checked at the start of this video. We got more food, more things, more certainty against the bad season. But we handed the rhythm of our own bodies over to a machine, and we've been a little out of step with ourselves ever since. We gained the clock. We lost the morning that didn't need one. So go back to the very beginning. That time you checked, that number, and the small pull of obligation it put on you, the sense that you might already be behind. Your ancestors never felt that. For 99% of the time there have been human beings, no one on Earth knew what hour it was, because there were no hours to know. They woke when the cold air thinned before dawn. They worked part of the day and rested the rest of it. They moved more than you will this year and slept harder than you will tonight. And when the sun went down, they gathered at a single light and told each other stories until the cooling air put them under. You have more than they could have dreamed of. You also sleep less, move less, and scatter your evenings across a dozen separate screens. They never owned a clock, they never built one, never wound one, never glanced at one with that small flinch of being late. Not one of them, in the whole long human story, ever once worried they were behind, and you've already felt it today.